미국의 기업가이자 베스트셀러 작가인 루크 버지스가 SNS의 위험성에 대해 이야기합니다.
Mimetic desire means that we're adopting another person's desire as our own, usually without even realizing that we're doing it. So social media has given us millions of mimetic models that we now have to contend with. Some people have went from having 10 mimetic models to now having 1 million. And we haven't quite come to grips as a culture with what that means for our mental and emotional health. There are two kinds of mimetic models. The first kind is called an external mediator of desire. These are models that are outside of our world, whether because they exist in a different social sphere than we do. There's no possibility of us coming into contact with them, and certainly not becoming rivals with them. Now, these external models of desire can be real, or they can be fictional. The other kind of model is inside of our world, called internal mediators of desire. These are people that we do come into contact with, and there is a possibility of conflict or rivalry with these people. These are people that are in our family, these are people in our workplace, these are people that could even be our friends. It's easier to compare ourselves to them. These are the kinds of people that we look to as benchmarks, and we're far more likely to be envious of somebody that we went to high school with who now has a great job and a beautiful spouse than we are to be envious of the richest person in the world. The danger with external mediators of desire, with keeping up with people that are very successful, with people that have modeled a certain kind of lifestyle, is that there's no end to that process. All desire is a form of transcendence. We desire to go beyond the boundaries, to go just over the mountain, to be the kind of person that we don't feel that we currently are. Having positive models of desire to emulate is a very good thing. It's important to have people that model virtues and goodness that we would like. But we have to understand the limitations of any model, and understanding how the dynamic between us and our models changes in that scenario is really, really important. It's also important to understand when somebody is an internal model of desire to us, because in that case, we have to have boundaries. All desire comes from us feeling like we lack something. And that can bring us into a dangerous, vicious cycle, because there will always be another model to find. We have to choose our models wisely. We also have to know when the model is inflaming us with a desire for something that's going to bring real fulfillment, or whether it's going to bring a dopamine hit or allow us to fantasize about a life that we'll probably never have. And even if we did have it, would probably make us miserable. All you need to do is go on Instagram and spend 5 minutes, and you see lifestyles modeled. You see vacation destinations modeled, fashions, political preferences. All of these desires are modeled for us 24 hours a day. Billions of them. And we need to understand the mimetic landscape of social media, or else we'll become totally controlled by it.
SNS를 자주 보게 되면 나도 모르게 다른 사람과 나를 비교하게 됩니다. 비교를 시작하면 끝이 없습니다. 세상에는 대단한 사람들이 너무 많고, 특히 SNS에는 허세를 부리는 사람도 많기 때문이죠. 이것은 우리의 삶을 비참하게 만들 수 있습니다. 스탠포드 뇌과학 교수 앤드류 후버만 역시 도파민을 근거로 SNS에 대해 부정적인 입장을 취하는데요. 같이 들어보시죠.
Just how triggering are our phones when it comes to dopamine?
Okay, great question. We often hear that social media is getting dopamine hit after dopamine hit. When we first get on social media for the first time or after a long period of time, the amount of dopamine that's released we think is quite substantial. It's novel. Remember, dopamine is about novelty, surprise, and the sense that we are on some exciting track. That's what dopamine is really about. It puts us into states of readiness, anticipation, looking, seeking, etc., almost always for things outside the confines of our skin. Serotonin does the opposite. When there's a lot of serotonin in our brain and body, typically it makes us feel satisfied, sated, and more quiescent, comfortable with what we have in our own immediate sphere and within us. If you look at somebody who's high on cocaine or methamphetamine, it's all about pursuit, because that's a very dopaminergic drug. In general, when we are in pursuit of things, dopamine is quite high. So the thing about cell phones is when you first get on there, let's say you're no Wi-Fi on the flight or something, and you land, it can actually be quite stimulating. You get a lot of dopamine. Oh, there's this. Oh, there's that. But very quickly, when you're scrolling on social media, you're no longer getting the novelty, but you're continuing to do it and you almost don't know why you're doing it. At that point, it shifts over to something that's a bit more like an obsessive compulsive behavior. where we can define an obsessive compulsive behavior where the obsession leads to a compulsion. So the obsession is a thought, the compulsion is a behavior, but the acting out of the compulsion merely serves to increase the obsession. Right? This is very different than being obsessed with food or obsessed with cleanliness.
There's no payoff.
Right, exactly. There's no anxiety relief by carrying out the compulsion. With OCD behaviors, like scrolling social media, the dopamine quickly wanes, and then you find that you're scrolling. You're like, why am I doing this? This isn't that interesting. Now, the algorithms for social media are very clever, and I don't want to demonize it. I, provide a lot of my life is spent on, on social media now. But the algorithms that they've incorporated function on the most powerful way to keep people doing a behavior, or an animal for that matter, is intermittent random reward, or random intermittent reward, that you don't know when you're going to hit the jackpot. So you're scrolling, and then you see something. Typically, it's very high, what, in nerd speak, we'd say signal to noise. So if you're reading some interesting things, this came out in the news, this came out, and then it's all of a sudden a riot, or a person that base jumping off a building, or scrolling looking at bodies or something like that. But look, if something's very tragic, that has this gravitational pull. And then what happens is you start getting the system working for that next dopamine hit that you don't know when it's going to come. It's just like gambling. So I look at social media as initially being very dopaminergic, driving reward, surprise, and excitement, but very quickly transitioning to something more like OCD. If we were to look at ourselves through the lens of an experiment, like we would an animal experiment, we think that animal is sick. If you saw an animal digging in the corner, looking for a bone, the dog, that's really sad. That's us.
인스타그램이나 유튜브 쇼츠를 보면서 내가 뭘 보려 하는지도 모른 채 아무 생각 없이 스크롤을 내리는 경험 하신 적 있으실 겁니다. 그러다가 한두 시간 순식간에 삭제되죠. SNS의 무작위적인 컨텐츠들은 처음에는 도파민을 자극하지만 시간이 지나면 강박적인 행동이 됩니다. 사람들이 SNS를 더 많이 사용하도록, 더 중독성을 띠도록 설계된 것이죠. 지금 바로 휴대폰을 놔두고 잠깐 산책을 해보는 건 어떨까요? 만약 본인이 습관적으로 SNS를 봐서 시간을 뺏기고 있다면 제 영상 안 좋은 습관 고치는 방법 참조하시고 해보시길 추천드리겠습니다. 지금까지 숨겨진 지혜였습니다.